Maya stood at the observation deck of the last human defense station and looked down at Earth below her. The planet seemed so small from up here, just a blue and green marble floating in the endless darkness of space. But to her, it was everything. It was home. It was the place where she had learned to walk, where she had laughed with friends, where her mother had taught her how to be brave. She had left Earth 3 weeks ago on a mission that most people said was impossible. They said she would die in the attempt. They said no human could penetrate the Zifferon defenses and reach the heart of their flagship. But Maya had volunteered anyway because someone had to try. Because giving up meant watching 3 billion people fall to alien enslavement. The Zifferon had arrived without warning on a quiet Tuesday morning. Their ships had appeared in Earth's orbit like massive shadows blocking out the sun. The governments of the world had tried to communicate with them, but there was no response. Instead, the aliens sent down transport beams and began collecting humans like farmers harvesting crops. Entire cities vanished in single hours. Families were torn apart. Children were taken from their parents' arms. That was when humanity finally understood what was happening. This was not a peaceful first contact. This was an invasion. This was extinction. Maya had been working as a scientist in a research facility when the first ship landed near her city. She remembered the way the ground had shaken. She remembered the sound of sirens and screams. She remembered running toward the facility's underground bunker with her colleagues, hoping to survive just a few more hours. But survival was not what she found in that bunker. Instead, she found her purpose. Dr. Harrison had been there, one of the brightest minds in human history. He had been studying the Zifferon transmissions and had made a discovery that changed everything. The aliens had a weakness, not a physical weakness that could be exploited with weapons, but a psychological one. The Zifferon were incapable of understanding human emotion. They could not comprehend love or sacrifice or loyalty. To them, these things were signs of inferior intelligence. But this weakness could become a strength if someone was willing to be trained for years to suppress their natural human responses. Someone would need to train themselves to appear emotionally empty, to hide their human nature so completely that the Zifferon sensors would never detect it. Someone would need to get close enough to Lord Vex himself to deliver a device that would destroy the entire fleet. Maya had volunteered immediately. She had spent the next 5 years in secret training, learning to control her heart rate, her breathing, her very thoughts. Monks had taught her meditation. Scientists had taught her how to recognize her own emotions and lock them away in deep places inside herself. Soldiers had taught her combat and escape tactics. By the time the training was complete, Maya had become something new. She was still human, but barely. She was a weapon designed and forged for a single purpose. Now she was here, aboard the largest Zifferon vessel in the fleet, walking through their corridors with her false identity intact. The sensors believed her to be a captured human who had been converted into a servant for the Zifferon cause. She had learned their language. She understood their ways. She could predict their thinking because she had studied them relentlessly. The other humans who had trained with her had not made it this far. Some had failed during the preparation stages and had to be moved to other roles. Some had been captured during infiltration and were now imprisoned in the detention blocks below. But Maya had succeeded. She had passed through security checkpoint after security checkpoint. She had answered every question asked of her. She had performed every task assigned to her with perfect obedience, and now she was close, so very close to her target. She could feel the device hidden in her suit, tucked against her skin where no sensor could easily detect it. It was the work of human scientists who had spent countless hours developing a frequency that could disrupt Zifferon quantum processors. The frequency was so specific that it would only affect alien technology, leaving human systems untouched. When activated, it would send out a pulse that would cascade through the entire fleet's communication network, shutting down every ship simultaneously. But first, she had to reach Lord Vex. She had to get close enough to him to ensure the frequency would propagate correctly. She had to look him in the eye when she did it and never let her fear show, because if the Zifferon detected even the slightest hint of deception, they would kill her instantly. And if they killed her before she could activate the device, Earth would fall. Maya turned away from the observation window and began walking through the corridors again. The other Zifferon servants paid her no attention as she passed. To them, she was just another worker, another slave to the cause of their empire. They did not see the strength in her heart. They did not sense the determination that burned inside her like a star. She had memorized the layout of the ship during her first week aboard. The central chamber where Lord Vex held court was 3 levels below the command deck. She would need to pass through 2 security checkpoints to reach it, but she had already created a false work order that would allow her access. It was forged perfectly, using techniques stolen from the Zifferon administrative database. As she walked, she thought about the people back on Earth who were waiting for her to succeed. She thought about the rescue teams standing by in hidden stations across the solar system. She thought about the world leaders who had authorized this mission and had been forced to keep it secret from most of the population. If this failed, they would need to prepare for the fall of Earth. They would need to find ways to help humanity survive enslavement. But Maya was not going to fail. She had not come this far just to give up now. She had trained too hard. She had sacrificed too much. The device in her suit was her weapon, and it was far more powerful than any gun or bomb. It was the culmination of human ingenuity and human determination and human will to survive. She reached the first security checkpoint. The Zifferon guard looked at her with eyes that resembled polished gems. He scanned her false credentials and nodded. She passed through without a word, her face remaining perfectly blank. Her heart was racing inside her chest, but no external sign betrayed her nervousness. The second checkpoint was more difficult. This guard seemed suspicious, his scanning device spending longer than usual examining her identification. Maya forced herself to breathe slowly and evenly. She forced herself to think of nothing but calm acceptance. If the guard discovered her deception, she would have to kill him. She had weapons concealed in her suit. She had been trained in combat by the best human soldiers, but killing a Zifferon would alert the entire ship to her presence. Finally, the guard nodded and let her pass. She had done it. She had penetrated deeper into the ship than any human had ever gone. In just a few more minutes, she would reach the central chamber. In just a few more minutes, she would face Lord Vex himself. Maya continued walking, her steps measured and precise. She could feel the weight of all humanity resting on her shoulders. She could feel the hopes and prayers of 3 billion people flowing through her like electricity. She was afraid. She was more afraid than she had ever been in her entire life. But she would not let that fear stop her. She was Maya Chen. She was the last hope of human civilization. And she was going to succeed. The detention block was a place of misery and despair. Long rows of transparent cells held human prisoners from a dozen different nations and cultures. They had been captured during the initial invasion, or had been discovered hiding in underground bunkers and mountain caves. The Zifferon kept them alive because humans could still be useful for labor and scientific study. But life in these cells was barely living at all. Elaine pushed a supply cart through the detention block, trying not to make eye contact with the prisoners. She wore the uniform of a Zifferon servant, a simple gray garment that marked her as someone who belonged here. The guards at each checkpoint had waved her through without question. No one suspected that she was anything other than what she appeared to be. Elaine was another human who had been trained for this mission, though her role was very different from Maya's. While Maya was preparing to infiltrate the heart of the flagship, Elaine was gathering information about the other prisoners. She was mapping out which humans were still alive, where they were being held, and whether any of them might be useful for future resistance efforts. It was grim work, but it was necessary. As she moved through the cells, she noticed something that made her stop. One of the prisoners was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, sitting alone on a cold metal bench. The girl had matted brown hair and hollow eyes, the look of someone who had lost everything. Elaine's heart ached seeing her, but she could not afford to show any emotion. The scanning devices were everywhere. If she displayed any sign of sympathy or grief, alarms would sound and guards would come running. She continued pushing her cart, but her mind was racing. That little girl represented everything that they were fighting for. That little girl was why Maya was risking her life on the flagship right now. That little girl was why thousands of humans had died in resistance operations across the globe. That little girl was humanity's future, and she was a prisoner in an alien cell. Elaine finished her route through the detention block and returned to the service corridors. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to feel the weight of what she had witnessed. She found an empty storage room and leaned against the wall, her body shaking with emotion that she had been forced to suppress for weeks. The training had taught her how to hide her feelings, but it could not teach her not to have them in the first place. Her communication device buzzed silently against her wrist. A message in code. Maya was approaching the central chamber. The final stages of the mission were beginning. Soon everything would change. Either humanity would be saved or everything would be lost. Elaine pulled herself together and straightened her uniform. She had her own role to play in the next phase of the operation. While Maya faced Lord Vex, Elaine would need to guide the imprisoned humans to evacuation points. She would need to coordinate with the rescue teams that were standing by in orbit. She would need to make sure that when the Zipheron fleet went dark, the humans below would be ready to escape. She activated her personal shield generator, a device so small that it appeared to be nothing more than a simple piece of jewelry. When activated, it would create a barrier that would protect her from the radiation surge that would follow the device's activation. Maya would not have this protection. Maya would face the full force of the pulse. Maya had known this from the beginning and had accepted the consequences. Back in the central chamber, Maya could see Lord Vex through the transparent walls of the waiting area. The alien commander was enormous, his crystalline body reaching nearly 15 feet from the ground. He was surrounded by attendants and guards, all of them moving with perfect synchronization. They seemed to function as a single organism, rather than as individual beings. It was unsettling to watch, but it also gave Maya valuable information about how the Zipheron hierarchy worked. She was ushered forward by a servant-class Zipheron, a smaller variant of the species that seemed to exist solely for menial tasks. The servant gestured for her to approach the Lord. Maya walked forward with measured steps, her face blank and her thoughts carefully controlled. Every cell in her body screamed at her to activate the device now, to end this nightmare before it went any further. But she had to be patient. She had to get close enough. Lord Vex looked down at her with eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. He made a sound that was part speech and part vibration through the air itself. The translation device in Maya's ear converted his words into human language. "You are the human who has been serving in the menial labor sectors," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, my lord," Maya responded in the Zipheron language. The words felt strange in her mouth, but she had practiced them thousands of times. "I have performed my duties with complete efficiency and obedience." The Lord moved closer, his massive form casting a shadow across the entire chamber. "I have been studying your species with great interest," he said. "You are so fragile, so easily broken, yet you resist with a tenacity that I find almost amusing. Why do you not simply accept your fate and serve us willingly?" Maya's mind raced through the possible responses she had rehearsed. She chose the one that she thought would appeal most to the Lord's sense of superiority. "We are simple beings, my lord. We understand that your species is superior in every way. Some of us resist, because we have not yet learned to accept this truth. But I have learned. I exist only to serve your cause now." The Lord circled her slowly, examining her with what might have been scientific curiosity or might have been predatory interest. It was impossible to tell from his expression. "Your neural patterns are unusual for a human," he said. "The scanning devices indicate that you have been trained in something. They show suppressed emotional responses. Tell me what has been done to you." Maya felt her heart rate accelerate, but she kept her external appearance calm. "It was one of the most advanced training techniques that her people had developed, my lord," she said. "It allows humans to function more efficiently in service to higher powers. We become more like your species when we suppress our emotions." "Fascinating," the Lord said. He appeared to be genuinely intrigued by this explanation. "Perhaps this is how we should condition all humans. Perhaps we should remove their emotional capacity entirely. Then they would never resist. Then they would serve with perfect obedience forever." This was the moment that Maya had been waiting for. The Lord was distracted by his own thoughts, pleased with his idea. He had moved within touching distance of her. She could see the subtle glow of energy that pulsed through his crystalline body, the power that flowed through him like electricity through a conductor. She reached into her suit and felt the smooth surface of the device. Then something unexpected happened. An alarm sounded throughout the entire ship. Red lights began to flash. The Lord's entire body went rigid with what might have been anger or might have been concern. "Something has gone wrong," he said, looking away from Maya toward his attendants. Elaine's presence had been detected. The alarms continued to blare throughout the detention block as Elaine made her move. She had been discovered while accessing the prisoner records, trying to compile information about which humans could be evacuated safely. A Zipheron security unit had caught her in the process, and when they scanned her, They had found the hidden encryption key that proved she was not what she claimed to be. There was no choice but to run. She threw aside her servant's uniform and activated her combat suit. The fabric transformed instantly, hardening into a protective shell that could withstand moderate laser fire. She moved with speed and precision that her captors had not expected from a human. 2 guards fell before they could even raise their weapons. Another managed to fire once, but her shield deflected the shot. The detained humans began to shout and press against their cell walls as she ran past them. They sensed that something was changing. They could feel that hope might still be possible in this place of despair. Elaine reached the main detention control panel and began entering the override codes that the Resistance had provided to her. One by one, the cell doors began to unlock with a soft hiss of pneumatic air. "Get to the east corridor now," she shouted to the prisoners. "Move quickly and quietly. There will be guides waiting for you there. They will take you to the evacuation zones." An elderly man helped a young child from her cell. A woman with a scarred face began organizing the other prisoners, directing them toward the corridor that Elaine had indicated. Despite their fear and their suffering, the humans showed an instinctive ability to work together. They understood that this might be their only chance at freedom. They would not waste it. Back in the central chamber, Maya saw the fear flicker across Lord Vex's face for just an instant. It was a moment of weakness, a crack in his superior demeanor. The Resistance had made a move. They had exposed themselves. Whatever happened next, the mission had entered its critical phase. "My lord," one of his attendants was saying, "there has been a security breach in the detention sector. A prisoner has managed to unlock the cells and is organizing an escape. We are sending security units to intercept, but the Resistance has done something unexpected. What could they possibly do that would surprise us?" the Lord said with a tone of disdain. "They are primitive creatures with primitive weapons. They cannot possibly threaten us." But even as he said these words, Maya could sense doubt in his voice. Somewhere deep in his crystalline consciousness, a possibility was forming. It was the possibility that humanity might be more dangerous than the Zipheron had realized. It was the possibility that the invasion had been a mistake. In the detention sector, Elaine was leading a group of 30 humans through emergency corridors that had been marked on her map. The walls around them were becoming hotter as the environmental systems began to fluctuate. The ship was entering a state of alert, its automated systems making adjustments to compensate for the security breach. Behind them, Zipheron security units were closing in. Their laser weapons lit up the darkness of the corridors with bright red streaks of energy. Several of the humans screamed as the heat washed over them, but most continued running. They had endured so much already that this was just another trial, another obstacle to overcome in their quest for freedom. Elaine turned and fired her weapon behind them without breaking stride. Her shots were precise and deadly. 2 guards fell, their crystalline bodies shattering into fragments that scattered across the floor. The 3rd guard retreated, seeking reinforcements. "We are not going to make it to the evacuation zone in time," said a young woman named Linda, who had been a teacher before the invasion. "There are too many guards. We will never get past them all." "We will get past them," Elaine said with certainty that she did not feel. "Because we have to. Because people are counting on us. Because this is our moment to show what humanity is truly capable of." She led them through a series of maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the detention sector. The tunnels were narrow and uncomfortable, requiring the humans to crouch as they moved forward. But they were also away from the main corridors where the guards were concentrated. It was a gamble, but it was a calculated one. Meanwhile, in the central chamber, Maya made her decision. The alarm in the security breach had created an opportunity that she would not get again. She reached for the device in her suit, but Lord Vex suddenly grabbed her wrist. His grip was impossibly strong, his crystalline fingers digging into her flesh. "You are not what you appear to be," he said. "I can see it now. You carry deception in your very molecules. You are like the others. You are trying to destroy us." Maya had trained for this moment, though she had hoped it would not come. She had hoped to complete the mission silently and escape before anyone knew what had happened. But sometimes hopes were not enough. Sometimes you had to face your enemy directly. She raised her other hand and struck him across the face. It was a calculated blow. Not hard enough to seriously injure him, but hard enough to surprise him and loosen his grip. She pulled her wrist free and activated the device. A soft chime sounded, no louder than the ringing of a bell. It was the only sound that would ever be heard from this particular weapon. The device was transmitting its frequency now, sending out a pulse that would cascade through the entire Zifferan fleet. Every ship would begin to lose power simultaneously. Every system would shut down in a synchronized cascade of failure. Lord Vex's crystalline body began to glow with an increasing intensity. His voice came out as a terrible scream that seemed to echo through the very fabric of the ship. "Why will you not die, human? Why will you continue to resist even now? You have no hope of survival. You have no hope of victory." Maya looked up at him with eyes that no longer needed to hide her emotions. "Because I am human," she said. "And humans never give up. Humans fight even when victory seems impossible. Humans sacrifice everything for those they love." The radiation surge came suddenly, a wave of pure energy that filled the chamber. Guards and attendants fell where they stood, their crystalline bodies fracturing under the strain. Lord Vex's body began to break apart like glass shattering in slow motion. But Maya was already moving, running toward the nearest exit before the chamber began to collapse. In the detention sector, the lights went out abruptly as the ship's power systems failed completely. For a moment there was absolute darkness. Then emergency lights flickered to life, casting everything in a dim red glow. Elaine and the human prisoners felt the ship begin to lose thrust. They felt it beginning to fall toward Earth. "This is it," Elaine said to the group. "This is what we have been waiting for. Move now, get to the evacuation points. The escape ships are already launching. We have to get to them before they leave." The evacuation ships rose from the detention sector with a sound like thunder. They had been hidden in the lower levels of the Zifferan vessel for weeks, disguised as maintenance platforms that the aliens never bothered to examine closely. Now they were revealed, their engines roaring to life as they began to lift away from the dying flagship. Elaine had managed to get most of the prisoners aboard the first ship. There had not been room for everyone, and she had been forced to make impossible choices about who would go first. The elderly and the very young had gone first, along with those who were too injured to move quickly. The others would have to wait for the second wave of evacuation ships that were already launching from the secret resistance bases hidden throughout the solar system. She stood at the exit ramp of the first ship, watching the detention sector fall away beneath them. The Zifferan vessel was breaking apart, its massive structure beginning to crumble as it lost power and control. Sections of the ship were tearing away from the main body, falling through Earth's atmosphere like meteors. The scale of the destruction was almost too enormous to comprehend. Behind her, the prisoners were crowded into the cargo hold of the evacuation ship, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. Many of them had not seen the sky in months. Many had thought they would never be free again. Now freedom was rushing toward them at incredible speed. "Is she alive?" asked Linda, the young teacher. "Is Maya still alive on that ship?" "I do not know," Elaine said, and the honesty in her voice reflected the uncertainty in her heart. "We have lost all communication with her. If she made it to the evacuation zone before the cascade started, she might have had time to get to a shuttle. If she did not make it, then she completed her mission knowing she would not survive." The teacher was silent for a moment, thinking about sacrifice and courage and the terrible price that some people had to pay for freedom. Then she turned to the other prisoners and began organizing them, making sure the injured received what treatment was possible, and that the children were kept calm. She was already thinking like a human leader again, someone responsible for helping others survive. Above them, in the depths of space, the rest of the Zifferan fleet was experiencing the same cascade failure that had begun aboard the flagship. One by one, the massive alien vessels went dark. Their weapon systems shut down. Their propulsion engines died. Their shields flickered and vanished. Without power, they were nothing more than hollow metal shells floating in the void of space, pulled gradually toward Earth by its gravity. The world below received news of the Zifferan fleet's collapse almost simultaneously across all communication channels. Television networks interrupted their broadcasts. Radio stations made sudden announcements. The internet erupted with images and videos of the falling ships. The invasion that had seemed inevitable, the extinction of humanity that had appeared certain just hours before, was suddenly reversing itself. In government bunkers and resistance hideouts, in homes and shelters and secret military installations, humanity began to cry. They cried with relief that they would see another day. They cried with joy that their children would grow up in freedom. They cried with grief for everyone who had already been lost. The tears of 3 billion people seemed to flow together like rivers, carrying away months of fear and despair. But in a maintenance corridor deep within the flagship, Maya was still moving. She had managed to avoid the worst of the radiation surge by activating her personal shield at the last moment. It was not meant to protect her from a cascade pulse, but it had bought her a few extra seconds to find cover, a few extra seconds to survive. Her body was screaming with pain. The radiation had burned her skin despite the shield. Her left arm hung useless at her side. Her vision was blurry and her hearing was muffled, but her mind was still clear. Her will to survive was still burning bright. She had not come this far just to die now. She pulled herself forward using her one good arm, dragging her legs behind her. The corridors were collapsing around her, pieces of debris falling from the ceiling. The metal beneath her was becoming hotter and hotter as the core systems began to melt down. She had maybe 5 minutes before this section of the ship became completely uninhabitable. There was an emergency shuttle bay on this level, or at least there had been before the cascade. Maya had memorized the layout of the ship during her training. She knew exactly where it was and what route would take her there most quickly. She just had to survive long enough to reach it. She limped forward, pain exploding through her body with every step. She had been trained to endure pain, but the training had never prepared her for something like this. This was beyond pain. This was agony that seemed to permeate her entire existence. But she refused to give up. She refused to let the sacrifice that so many humans had made be wasted. Behind her, sections of the corridor were collapsing and filling with superheated steam. The emergency lights flickered and failed one by one, leaving her to navigate through nearly complete darkness. She used her memory and her training to guide herself forward, counting her steps and estimating distances based on the layouts she had studied so many times. Finally, she reached the shuttle bay. The massive doors were locked, sealed by the ship's automated systems when the cascade began. But Maya had access codes for this. She had thought of everything when she was planning this mission. She knew the Zifferin systems intimately because she had spent 5 years studying nothing but their technology and their tactics. She entered the code with her one usable hand, her fingers trembling from pain and exhaustion. The doors hissed open, revealing a bay with 4 remaining shuttles. The other vessels must have been launched already by Zifferon crews trying to escape the dying ship. But these 4 were still here, and one of them was still powered and ready to launch. Maya dragged herself into the nearest shuttle and activated the ignition sequence. The engines came to life with a familiar hum. The bay doors that led to the void of space slowly began to open. Outside she could see Earth, beautiful and distant and calling to her like a mother calling to a lost child. She engaged the thrusters and the shuttle lifted off from the bay floor. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed like she might not make it. The bay doors were opening slowly, and debris was falling from the ceiling of the shuttle bay. But Maya pushed the engines to their maximum, and the shuttle shot forward at an angle that took it through the widening gap in the doors just as they finished opening. Behind her, the flagship broke apart completely, its massive structure finally succumbing to the stress and damage that the cascade had caused. Pieces of the alien vessel scattered across the solar system, each one burning up as it entered Earth's atmosphere or drifting away into the cold, black void of space. Maya set her course for Earth and allowed herself to rest. For the first time since she had begun this mission, around her, the evacuation ships were descending toward the planet, carrying thousands of freed humans back to their homes. And somewhere above her, the rescue vessels were racing toward her falling shuttle to catch her before it could crash. The rescue shuttle caught Maya's vessel just as it was entering the upper layers of Earth's atmosphere. The impact was gentle but firm, the docking mechanism engaging with a soft clang that seemed impossibly loud in the silence of space. Within seconds, a medical team was aboard her shuttle, working quickly to stabilize her injuries and remove her from the vessel before it burned up in the atmosphere. Maya felt hands lifting her onto a stretcher. She felt the sting of medical injections entering her veins. She felt the pull of gravity increasing as they descended toward Earth. But she could not open her eyes. Her body had finally given up the fight, exhausted by weeks of tension and minutes of agony. As consciousness slipped away from her, her last thought was a simple one. It was over. When Maya opened her eyes again, she was in a hospital bed in what appeared to be a military medical facility. Sunlight streamed through windows that looked out onto a clear sky. Real sunlight. The kind that came from Earth's sun, not from artificial light sources hidden deep within an alien vessel. For a moment, she could barely comprehend that she was really home. A doctor noticed her stirring and came quickly to her side. "You're awake at last," he said with a smile. "We were beginning to wonder if you would ever wake up. You have been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days, Maya whispered. Her voice was hoarse and barely audible. "How long was I asleep?" The doctor checked her vital signs and made notes on a digital pad. "Considering the extent of your injuries, we are amazed that you survived at all. The radiation exposure alone should have been lethal. But humans are surprisingly resilient creatures. Perhaps your years of training prepared your body for things that normal humans could not survive." "What about the others?" Maya asked, and then she forced herself to sit up despite the pain that shot through her. "The prisoners. The ones we evacuated from the flagship. Are they safe?" "They are safe," the doctor assured her. "Over 7,000 humans were successfully evacuated from Zephyron custody. They are being processed and reunited with their families. Most of them have been returned to their home nations by now. You have become something of a hero to them. Many of them wanted to come and thank you, but we thought it best that you rest first." Maya closed her eyes and felt tears beginning to run down her face. 7,000. 7,000 people who would see the sun again. 7,000 people who would go home to their families. It was not everyone who had been captured during the invasion, but it was a start. It was a foundation upon which humanity could begin to rebuild. Over the next week, as her strength gradually returned, Maya began to learn what had happened in the world during her unconsciousness. The Zephyron invasion had collapsed completely. Every ship in their fleet had been disabled by the frequency pulse that her device had sent out. The aliens had not been prepared for a coordinated failure of all their systems at once. They had no backup protocols. They had not thought they would ever need them. With their ships disabled and their weapon systems offline, the Zephyron had been powerless to resist. Military forces from around the world had moved in to contain the surviving aliens. Some had been captured. Others had been killed. A few, mainly the lowest-ranking servants, had actually given up without a fight. They seemed almost relieved to be out of the conflict, but the world had paid a heavy price for victory. Over 500 million humans had died during the invasion and the resistance operations that had followed. 500 million. The number was so large that it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Entire families had been wiped out. Entire towns had disappeared from the map. The world would take decades to recover from the losses, yet there was also hope. In every nation, survivors were finding each other and beginning to rebuild. Farmers were returning to their fields to plant new crops. Engineers were working to repair the infrastructure that had been damaged during the invasion. Scientists were already beginning to study the Zephyron technology, knowing that it could provide humanity with knowledge and tools that could advance their civilization by centuries. On the 10th day after her rescue, Maya was released from the hospital. She walked out into the sunshine with Elaine beside her, both of them moving slowly and carefully. They were still healing, still recovering from their injuries. But they were alive, and that was what mattered. Elaine took Maya's hand as they walked through the streets of the city. Around them, people were beginning to return to something like normal life. Shops were reopening. Schools were preparing to start classes again. Children were playing in parks and laughing at jokes that seemed impossibly frivolous after months of fear. It was strange to see the world healing itself so quickly, but it was also beautiful. "Do you think it is really over?" Elaine asked. "Do you think they will not come back?" "I do not know," Maya said honestly. "I hope so, I believe so, but I also believe that humanity will be ready if they ever do come back. We know now that we are capable of great things. We know that we can work together and accomplish what seemed impossible. The Zephyron underestimated us. I do not think any enemy will ever make that mistake again." They walked in silence for a while, each woman lost in her own thoughts about the past and the future. The city around them slowly came back to life as they moved through it. People nodded at them in recognition. Many knew who they were. Many understood that these two women had risked everything to save humanity. But Maya did not feel like a hero. She felt tired. She felt the weight of everyone she had known who had died during the invasion. She felt the responsibility that came with having the power to change the course of human history. She felt the knowledge that humanity had survived, but only barely, and that the cost had been almost unbearably high. That evening, Maya stood on a balcony and looked up at the stars. For the first time in months, the sky was clear of Zephyr and ships. The stars seemed to shine brighter than they ever had before, as if they were celebrating humanity's victory. Somewhere out there, she knew there were other civilizations, other species, other powers that might one day discover Earth. But when they came, they would find a species that had already survived the impossible. They would find a people who understood that love and sacrifice and loyalty were not weaknesses but strengths. They would find humans who had learned the greatest lesson that the universe had to teach, that the smallest and most fragile species could sometimes be the most resilient. Elaine joined her on the balcony, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We did it," she said simply. "Against all odds, we actually did it." "We did," Maya agreed. "And now we begin the real work. Now we heal. Now we rebuild. Now we make sure that what happened to us never happens to another species in the galaxy. Now we show the universe what humanity is truly capable of." The sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and gold. In that light, the entire world seemed to glow with possibility. The invasion was over. The war was won. And for the first time in a long time, humanity could look toward the future with hope instead of fear.